Welcome back. This is Tea and Table, your favorite micro podcast, back with a new episode. This week, I'll tell you a bit about a prototype I'm working on called Don't Fall. In episode 9, I talked about working on multiple games at once. The title of that episode was Branching Out, and you can, of course, find that in the backlog of the podcast. So Don't Fall is another prototype I'm working on beyond, for example, the game about hacking, working title Infiltration. So what is Don't Fall? It's the board game variant of a jump and run video game or 2D platformer video game. The game has levels, just like a platformer video game, and you cooperatively control a character to traverse the level, collecting stars and interacting with the environment to finally navigate to a specific place in the level to finish it. You move around a level by taking turns to play movements and other action cards from your hand, which let you plot out the path your character takes. If you can, you really should pause the episode right now because I've put some pictures in the show notes that show you what a level and the action cards look like. I'll just stop here and give you time to pause the podcast and look at the pictures. Alright, moving on. So the cards you play from your hand come from a shuffled draw pile, and you draw back up to a hand limit of just a few cards after you've played one. If the draw pile runs out and you haven't finished the level, it's game over and you can try again. Now, the catch with all of this is that you cannot talk with the other players to plan out movements. Remember, the game is cooperative. And how well you did in a level depends on how many stars you collected, and those stars are also required to unlock future levels. So let's briefly talk about the video game inspiration here. I don't think a board game can easily capture the dexterity challenge of a platformer video game, but rather with this game, I want to focus on the puzzle aspect of combining the typical platformer actions, for example, jumping, double jumping, wall jumping, or dashing, into just the right sequence to make it across a tricky platforming section. I'm particularly thinking of amazing video games like Hollow Knight, my favorite game of all time, or perhaps even more fittingly, Celeste, which is a game about a girl called Madeline who climbs up Celeste Mountain, fighting her own anxiety and depression along the way, and taking time to self-reflect on her life and journey. This video game, Celeste, is mechanically a pure platformer game, where traversing levels is really the entire challenge. It's also pretty hard, by the way, and I haven't finished it because of the snowstorm level where the wind keeps pushing you back. Anyway, coming back to my board game, my intention is that you can use your action cards to communicate. As a very simple example, you could play an action that moves the character left to indicate that you have some cards in hand that will help traverse the left side of the level. To truly master a level and collect all the available stars in one run, you may have to strategize before receiving your cards. I'm also planning a way for you to select specific packages of actions before starting the level. So, for example, you could pick from either the jump package that gives you more jump cards in the overall deck of action cards, or you could pick the dash package that gives you more dash actions. Similarly, you can pick a set of special bonuses, like, for example, a bonus that lets you play 2 actions in one turn once during the level. I also have a ton of ideas for interesting and fun environmental level elements or actions. For example, there are jump pads that catapult you up into the air, or spikes on the ground that you are not allowed to touch. Now, the game has already evolved. At the very beginning of developing it, I made it so you would lay out a sequence of action cards, but you would not trace those actions on the level's map. This required you to trace the already laid out path the character would take every single time you take an action, making it somewhat tedious and I assume quite inaccessible for many people who are not great at this kind of spatial visualization. There are ways to help with this, like save points that let you resolve a sequence of programmed cards, but I don't think it solves the fundamental issue with it. So in my latest iteration, you actually trace out the path on the level map, which solves this problem and actually didn't hurt the core idea of the game as I initially thought. However, in my mind, the next major question to resolve is whether you should be able to play actions out of order. The current iteration allows you to do that, so you can place movement actions anywhere on the level map. For example, you could play a dash action on your very first turn and actually plot out this dash movement to be the last piece of movement. However, in my mind, the next major question to resolve is whether you should be able to play actions out of order. The current iteration allows you to do that, so you can place movement actions anywhere on the level map. For example, you could play a dash action on your very first turn and actually plot out this dash movement to be the last piece of the movement path the character takes. So you are still programming movement in a way and not moving the character in real time, but you are visualizing it on the map. During the other turns, you still need to make sure that you eventually connect this part of the path with the rest of the path that you will plan out. So this already works and is pretty fun. However, a drawback is that it's tricky and a bit tedious to trace out the entire path on the map, meaning you don't just move a meeple from one space to another. Currently, I use simple cubes to trace the path, but you could also draw on the map. You can also see this in the photo album I posted in the show notes. There are various options to trace the path and keep it around on the map, and they all require quite a bunch of components and bookkeeping effort. There are also annoying edge cases like, for example, crossing the path, or keeping track of where a movement action starts and ends if you don't play it in sequence and it still needs to be connected to the remaining path later on. So, long story short, my next step is to see if I can make it even simpler and just have players play the action in order and move a single character token around the map, which would immediately solve a lot of these issues. Of course, this also makes the gameplay less flexible since you can no longer play cards anywhere on the map, and to counter that, I'll start by increasing players' hand sizes from 3 to something like perhaps 5. I'll also add some one-time bonus actions like a bonus to undo the previous turn to show the other players one of your cards, or to switch the direction of a card from left to right or the other way around. Now, before I forget about the tea part of the Tea and Table podcast, this week I'm having a green tea that is actually one of the few green teas that I keep coming back to. I feel like many other green teas are nice but don't necessarily have a super distinct and unique taste. Any true tea experts out there now have the license to punch me, I guess. But this one does have a very unique taste in my opinion, and it also looks quite different from other types of green tea. It's called China Longqing, which means dragon well in English, and the leaves are very long, straight, and flat, so they don't curl like other types of green tea. Very tasty, would recommend. And with that, I'm off to work on Don't Fall this week. I hope you liked the episode and I managed to get the general concept across. If you have any thoughts on the game or anything else, please drop me a line. All my contacts are in the show notes, and I'll talk to you next time.